Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I'm your host, Kunthavi, a research analyst at the Institute. India and Japan share a rich bilateral relationship. However, this hasn't always been the case. To further analyze the trajectory of this bilateral relationship alongside historical approaches, I'm delighted to be joined by Emeritus Professor Purnendra Jain, School of Social Sciences, the University of Adelaide. Welcome to South Asia Chat, Prof. Jain.
Thank you.
So, as established before, India and Japan share a rich bilateral relationship. In the evolving context of China, Quad, and South Asia, it will be crucial to revisit this relationship and discuss the moving components of these growing ties. So, to start off, both countries, as they share a very strong bilateral relationship today, and it's a common perception that what brought Tokyo and New Delhi together mainly was the rise of China and changing dynamics prevailing within Asia. What is your view on this stance? Do you think this is a rather reductive portrayal of their bilateral relationship, or has it advanced beyond this main contributing factor?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Before I delve into the China question, I just thought it might be important for the listener to have some background. So, in the broader Asian context, South Asia, generally speaking, and India particularly, remained on the periphery of Japan's Asia vision for most of the post-war period, especially when we compare Japan's far deeper engagement with East and Southeast Asia. So in this period, that is the post-war period, South Asia was the other Asia or uh, for Japan, and it can be safely said that Japan's presence in South Asia, be it economic, political, or strategic, came nowhere close to the connections Japan established in the other Asian sub-region. So only in the very early post-war period, say up to the late 1950s, we see some engagement with India becoming a recipient of Japan's first yen loans for developmental purposes and mutual visits of prime ministers of the two countries, Mr. Kishi to India and Prime Minister Nehru to Japan. We can fast forward that, and on the China question, as you have asked, the positive story of India-Japan bilateral cooperation in the 21st century started a little before China began to loom as a factor over Japan's strategic horizon. So, when Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori from Japan visited India in 2000, after the lowest point in the relationship following India's nuclear testing in 1998, this was a kind of bridge building exercise. American President Bill Clinton had visited India only a few months previously, seeing US India relations on a mending path. Tokyo also seized the moment and began to seek partnership with India. So the process of recovery from the fallout of 1998 was slow, but nevertheless on a path of rediscovering of the relationship. So Prime Minister Modi's visit was followed by Indian Prime Minister Vajpayee's visit to Japan in 2001, and then in 2005 the Japanese Prime Minister Mr. Koizumi came to India. But the real story starts with Shinzo Abe, Prime Minister of Japan, and Manmohan Singh, then Prime Minister of India, meeting in Tokyo in 2006. The stage was set for a new era in the Japan-India relationship with the meeting of these two prime ministers in 2006, when they announced an India-Japan a strategic and global partnership a narrative that has remained as the mainstay of the bilateral relationship. Then, Abe's first term as Prime Minister and his speech in the Indian Parliament had opened a brand new chapter in the relationship. So, both under Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party and opposition in power after Abe had stepped down in 2007 until 2012, the Japan-India relationship remained on an upward trajectory, but a real push came when Abe returned to power in 2012. In December 2015, Prime Minister Abe paid an official visit to India, and the two prime ministers at that time, of course, the new Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, they resolved to transform the India or Japan-India special strategic and global partnership into a deep, broad-based and action-oriented partnership. And this adjective special was added in September 2014 at the time of Mr. Modi's visit to Japan. And at their 2015 meeting, they announced Japan and India Vision 2025, a special strategic and global partnership working together for peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region and the world. So now coming to China very quickly, China is a factor, absolutely no denying, in both the bilateral relationship and many minilateral frameworks which have been formed. Having said that, I would also like to mention that there are other attractions too. For example, from Japan's perspective, India's potential in the economic field is a big attraction, and India's strategic value overall, not just in relation to China, is also important in my view. For example, India as a significant power in the Indian Ocean region, which is very attractive to Japan. Both Japan and India, they want to reform the United Nations and expand the membership of the Security Council. And of course, Japan would like to keep India close despite New Delhi's orientation towards Russia and its minilaterals involving Russia and China, namely the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS, for example. But to answer your question in short, yes, China is a huge factor, but that is not the factor.
Thank you so much for sharing your views about what contributed to the strong bilateral ties and also some historical developments and context to their relationship. And now, touching upon what you've already shared about their more recent initiatives, if you look towards more recent projects within the bilateral relationship, Japan has set to expand energy transition support to India, driving the transition to clear energy. And this is one of the more current examples of the enhanced bilateral ties, and also taking note of the both states' participation in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, also known as IPEF. What other areas of cooperation can you see both states looking at to further optimize their bilateral ties or maximize each other's strengths?
Okay, I think there are three parts to this question. One is the transition to clean energy. The other is what other areas of cooperation can both states look at. And the third one is the IPEF, which is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I will try and answer those questions in that, in that context. So the first is about the clean energy. And India-Japan Clean Energy Partnership Statement, I think it was announced very recently in March 2022 when Japanese Prime Minister Kishida was he went to Delhi for a summit meeting with the Indian Prime Minister. So they had announced detailing areas of cooperation in clean energy, in clean energy as clean energy partnership. And this was actually reiterated at the time of another summit on the sidelines of the Quad meeting in Tokyo in May this year, that is 2022. I think Japanese industry minister uh, Koichi Hagiuda also recently stated that Japan intends to encourage India to accelerate the switch to clean energy by expanding a program which Japan has already started with Southeast Asian countries last year. So I think the Japanese side is taking the example of its cooperation with ASEAN countries and how that experience can be then used to transit India to clean energy platforms, that is decarbonization. It's a very new initiative, and it's hard to know. What we know that Japan is committed to a net zero emission by 2050, whereas India is committed to a net zero emission 2070. So there is already 20 years lag between Japan and India's objective towards net zero. So that's why Japan can accelerate that process, or at least trying to help India accelerate that process. However, I can see some roadblocks. It's not easy because experiences which the Japanese companies are having in Southeast Asian nations, it can lead to increased manufacturing costs. Also, Japanese companies might face how to deal with suppliers and contractors and their decarbonization policy, because that impinges on the net zero emission as well. And of course, there is shortage of renewable energy, which could be another impediment to accelerate this process. But nevertheless, this is a very good initiative, as we know that climate change has become a very important issue in global politics. There are some other joint Indo-Japanese initiatives which are new. One of them is the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. Japan is encouraging its companies to exit China and relocate companies back to Japan or to other Asian countries, including India. So India is also a target country for this China exit policy. But looking at some of the recent figures, I didn't see many Japanese companies opting to go to India. They are going in Southeast Asian countries, namely Thailand and Vietnam, but I haven't seen many going to India. So this process is also an important initiative, but the process is quite slow. Japan has established what they call Japanese industrial towns in India, in 9 Indian states. But looking at the numbers of companies moving into those industrial towns, they are, they are not significant by any means. So the process is quite slow. The initiatives are there, but the process of implementation is very slow. So similarly, we have India-Japan Digital Partnership and the Startup Hub because of Modi's initiative about digitalization of the Indian economy. Skill development is another. Coming to the IPEF, IPEF is the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This is a regional scheme which goes to show that the United States is trying to regain credibility in the region after the Trump administration had withdrawn from the CPTPP, or the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. I would like to note here that IPEF is only a framework and not a trade deal. But for India, which withdrew at last minute from the RCEP, the IPEF provides India a good chance to participate in the framing of the ground rules for a fair trade or fairer trade regime for the region. And this has happened in Tokyo. This initiative was announced in Tokyo at the Quad Summit, shows Japan as a key country behind this scheme, and certainly India has signed up as many other regional countries. So we need to wait and see what its outcomes in the short and medium term. It's hard to say at this stage what will be its achievement.
Again, very interesting what you've shared about the more recent projects and the sort of evolution and the future trajectory of their bilateral relationship. Like, the perception is that things will move quickly, but that might not be the case for a lot of things that they're involved in. And I guess another huge part of, or you could say a hallmark of India's Japan's relationship is their respective roles in the Quad. And earlier in May this year, the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness, IPMDA, was announced to work with regional partners to respond to humanitarian and natural disasters, among others. The leaders also committed to deepening cooperation on infrastructure, stating that such investment is crucial to driving productivity and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. With ambitious goals set, what is the future trajectory of Quad in South Asia? And how do you see the roles of Japan and India evolving within the dialogue? I also think you've covered a little bit about laying the how IPEF sort of lays the groundwork or the ground rules in the region. So I guess in that same context, where do we see Quad?
I mean, first of all, look, one may argue, you talk about humanitarian and natural disasters. One could argue that the Quad's orientation has shifted a little towards its original aims when it was first formed in the wake of the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean. The four countries had then formed an informal network and delivered humanitarian assistance in the wake of the disaster. But the Quad, during its first iteration in the mid 2000s, had vastly different geostrategic circumstances than when it was revived in 2017 and upgraded to the leaders level from official and ministerial level meetings. So now the goals are broadened and ambitious, of course, they are, but what can be effectively delivered is yet to be seen. I mean, we have heard about vaccine delivery, but we don't know exactly how many and which country was involved in what way. But there has been some progress on vaccine diplomacy through the Quad. You raised the point about the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness, which was announced at the Quad Summit itself. And this is a scheme, I believe, to launch joint surveillance of the maritime space, which will involve, in my view, navies of the four nations. So, involving navies of the four nations and using them for surveillance, the purported aim is to check illegal fishing, but it really is a means, in my view, for the Quad to check China's activities particularly in the Indian Ocean area. And some has already commented that this can lead to further arms race and military tensions in the region. So how this IPMDA is going to go ahead and forward is something we need to sit and watch, because this is not without problems. There are issues, and these countries have to be very careful how they move forward and whether that's going to solve problems or create more of them. Um, yeah, I mean, progress on bilateral and quadrilateral or other minilateral um, frameworks, they take somewhat different course. Bilaterally, for example, there are various frameworks of security and defense dialogue between Japan and India, including foreign and defense ministerial meeting. There is a 2+2 meeting established recently involving the defense and foreign ministers of the two countries. And then they have Coast Guard to Coast Guard dialogue. So there are lots of bilateral frameworks in military and defense terms, but how these are going to help the trilateral and quadrilateral process, that is not clear to me. We can see that the coordinations are already involved in the Malabar exercise and other military exercises carried out bilaterally and trilaterally. So I believe one could argue that India-Japan bilateral connections support trilateral and quadrilateral frameworks. But of course, as I said, that they follow somewhat very different path. The nature of bilateralism is very different from the nature of minilateralism or plurilateralism.
Thank you again. So we've sort of now visited or reviewed India-Japan ties, some of the hallmark projects, recent initiative, and some of the historical context. And I guess moving on to another important question today for Japan is much of the progress made in India-Japan relations in recent years from the Japanese side has been credited to former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. As you've recently written, Abe has left an enduring and lasting mark in developing a comprehensive partnership with India. Even after retiring from the prime ministership, he continued to bat for India. Can you perhaps share some of Mr. Abe's crucial contributions to the advancement of India-Japan's ties?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would like to mention that, Mr. Abe was a diplomatic superman because, first of all, he managed or he had a very good relationship with India's Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, when Abe was in power first time in 2006-7 and also between 2012 and 14. So Mr. Manmohan Singh was from a very different political party, and then came Mr. Modi in 2014, and Abe befriended both Mr. Singh and Mr. Modi equally. Maybe his chemistry with Modi was much stronger, but the point I want to make here that Mr. Abe was very good at managing political leaders, global political leaders from different political parties. We also saw that in the case of the United States, because Mr. Abe was able to, very well go with Mr. Obama, and then a completely different, from a completely different party and completely different personality, that is Mr. Trump. So Abe had that kind of diplomatic, a persona behind him who could really, befriend leaders from different political parties. Now, Abe's signature strategy or vision of the free and open Indo-Pacific, which has now been embraced around the world, was first laid out as a blueprint in Abe's speech to the Indian Parliament in 2007 during his first visit as Prime Minister. So Abe brought India on the global map through his creation and support for new networks of collaborative frameworks, bringing India into them. The Quad, we have already talked about the Quad as an example. Abe was also quite helpful in bringing India into different trilaterals involving the US, Japan, and India, as well as involving Japan, Australia, and India trilateral. Actually, it's quite interesting. I mean, Abe became the longest serving Prime Minister of Japan. He visited India 4 times during his prime ministership, and he hosted Indian prime ministers 5 times. So we can see the intensity of the India-Japan relationship during Mr. Abe's prime ministership. No other prime minister of Japan or India had met each other for such a large number of times as did Mr. Abe. A month prior to his assassination, Abe took up the chairperson position of the Japan-India Association, which is a private non-government organization. And in my view, this could have been a vehicle for Abe to keep India close to Japan even when he was out of office. I mean, the importance of Mr. Abe has been noted everywhere in the Indian press. But I just want to mention here the tweets by the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. He called Mr. Abe a dear friend with whom he had a personal bond. And he also called Mr. Abe a champion of India-Japan friendship. Equally, the former Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, also called Abe a good friend of mine. So we can see that the goodwill in India for Abe came from everywhere and all political parties of all colors. And we can see this, that the Indian government then awarded its second highest civilian award, the Padma Vibhushan, to Mr. Abe. And this is a testament. This is testament to Mr. Abe's or India's respect and warmth that Mr. Abe enjoyed in India. Also, the Indian government announced a day of national mourning following his assassination to honor his contribution to India. So we can see that Abe was a phenomenal impact on India-Japan relations, which not only us who acknowledge this through our research and writings, but the Indian government, business, and everywhere from India, that has been the case.
And to sort of follow up and kind of end the podcast, without a doubt, like you've mentioned, Abe was a pivotal driver in enhancing in Japan-India ties. He was also considered the chief architect for Quad. How do you see the bilateral relationship panning out under the current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida? Do you expect Japan to follow the Abe path, or do you see any likely changes in Japan's foreign policy imperatives?
My answer to these questions is broadly Japan will follow Abe's path. The current Prime Minister, Mr. Kishida, as a long-serving former foreign minister under Abe, knows India well and the value of India for Japan. So the bilateral relationship stands on solid institutional arrangements, such as an annual summit between the prime ministers, the 2+2 dialogue framework between the foreign and defense ministers, and in 2020 the two nations also signed what is called AXA, the Acquisition and Cross Servicing Agreement, that allows access to each other's provision of supplies and services during the bilateral exercises and training. And actually the Quad also undergirds India-Japan relations. So Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who took office late last year, 2021, seems to attach importance to India through his visit to India early in 2022 and his very warm reception of Prime Minister Modi during the May Quad summit in Tokyo. Although Kishida prefers to distinguish, or any prime minister, new prime minister would like to do that, distinguish himself from his former boss and Prime Minister Abe, Kishida's broad foreign policy directions do not, in my analysis, diverge significantly from that of Abe. There are some subtle differences, but Kishida is attached to the Quad and regards India's role as crucial to sustain his free and open Indo-Pacific concept. We can see, having said that, we can see some small cracks appearing, such as that related to their different stance towards the Ukraine war. In particular, New Delhi's strategic and economic closeness to Russia, but these are unlikely to derail the process which has been set in motion, built over the last 2 decades. I remember one Japanese scholar describing the relationship as a close relationship with discrepancies. And I think these discrepancies are their different views towards Russia and India's membership in SCO and India's membership in BRICS. But I think these are not going to disturb the relationship in a big way in any case. I think before Mr. Kishida went to India earlier this year, he wrote an op-ed, opinion piece in India's newspaper called the Indian Express, and where he clearly mentioned about India's importance to Japan. And he said that how can we build resilient supply chains and reinvigorate the economy without India's cooperation, and international challenges, cybersecurity, climate change. So he said that both Japan and India are committed to taking bold measures to tackle those challenges. So he can see that how important India is. So finally, my last sentence or words are that while Kishida seems committed to India, absolutely no doubt about it, but the kind of leadership provided by Abe will be missed, and it seems Abe is irreplaceable for now. However, the relationship, as I have said, today stands on solid footing.
Thank you, Prof. Jain. You were listening to South Asia Chat. In the first week of August, ISES will be holding its annual conference virtually. You can get updates on our website, ises.nus.edu.sg, or from social media. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you.